My name is Dominic DeBaldo. I'm president of the Nutley Museum and Historical Society. And on behalf of our vice president, Suzanne Hager, and the rest of the board of directors, welcome to the Nutley Museum. We appreciate you guys coming out today. And we have a very special treat because these photographs really have probably not been seen since N.F. Carroll did them, actually took the photos back over 100 years ago. The name of the show, of course, is Lost and Found Nutley, the Forgotten Photographs of N.F. Carroll. And as you can see, looking around, Nutley was quite a bucolic community back then, unlike today. But that's progress. This show is a collaboration between the Nutley Historical Society and our museum director, John Simcoe, who is right here in front. And also our town historian, John Demmer, who, John, oh, you're right behind me, there you go. They keep moving around, they know I'm easy to confuse. So how about a big hand for these two guys for putting the show together. Okay, we have some special guests here. Mayor Joe Scarpelli. There he is, right here. Nutley Board of Ed member Charlie Kaczynski, I believe he just left. Major benefactor and friend of the museum, Mr. Cy Monsieur. World-renowned oil painter Gary Irby is here with his wife Zenny. Local author and also historian. He does a lot of work with both John and John. Dave Wilson is here. Dave's over here. And the prize for the person who drove the longest goes to Mr. Adam Hardy here. Just for the show and to hear me speak, he came all the way in from Cape Town, South Africa. I might have stretched that last one just a tad. A couple of things. We have been getting grants from Essex County, which allows us to put on shows such as this. And they're always asking us for numbers. How many of you had attend? There is a logbook on the back table, so if you would kindly write in your name so we can keep track. And if you want to write in the names of several of your friends and worst enemies, that's fine. Please sign the guest book. While you're there, also take a membership form. By joining the society, it does help us continue to grow and keep going. Any donations are always and deeply appreciated. And a couple of household issues. If anyone needs a restroom, through that door on the right, just work your way to the back. And also up the front stairs, there is one upstairs. There's a bunch of goodies on the table there. There's some drinks and all. That's pretty much it. So I'm going to turn this over to John Demmer and enjoy the show. Thank you again for coming. Correction, John Simcoe. Enjoy the show either way.
Can everybody hear me if I talk without this? No. Okay. All right. Just a couple of things. I want to mention the Nutley Historical Society will turn 75 years old in 2020, next year. So look for some programs that we're going to be doing to celebrate that. In March 5th in 1945, we came into being. We weren't able to occupy this really wonderful museum space until 1954 by the time it got ready for us. But we've been around for 75 years, and we're looking forward to next year to doing a lot of big programs. I'm particularly excited about today's exhibit. Nutley Historical Society, of course, attempts to gather, prepare, interpret Nutley historical items and share it with the community. So we have our own programs. We also go outside and collaborate with others. And today with John Demmer's collection of photographs, it really is very exciting. The moment I saw the digital files for these, I knew that we needed to do a show here for it. PowerPoint is great. You get to see these images on a screen. They could be as big as you want. But I felt these really had to be looked at. People had to see them the way that N.F. Carroll intended them to be, which was nice, big, large, physical prints. And so that's why we made the decision to do this here, to select about 35 out of about 140. You are seeing their beautiful photos throughout, but you're seeing what I think is really sort of the cream of the crop that is gathered around Joseph Kingsland and his extended family, and Carryl, who married into it. So I just want to mention that. I want to thank John Demmer for having the foresight to see these negatives, take a chance on acquiring, and he'll tell you how we acquired them, and preserving them, keeping them until the technology sort of came around for them to be digitized and for us to produce these photographs. Stay 1 second while I retrieve my notes. The last thing I just want to mention here is to put these photos in context. These are taken when Nutley is in what I think is its real golden age. So between 1890 and 1900, lots of different things are happening. We finally purchased that oval, the school park area from the old mills. The old mills are on their way out. They've been closed down. Nutley, thankfully, has got the railroad that came through, and it allowed us to become a commuting town. So that meant that artists, lawyers, doctors, we're now moving here. In 1890 to 1900, we've got this real mix of rural farmland that was beginning to be cut up into the Nutley that we know today. So 1886, for instance, there were 1,500 people living in Nutley, New Jersey. By 1900, there were over 4,000, so almost triple that amount in about 14 years or so. 1894 is when our first real school opens, our first high school opens. 1891, electricity is finally laid out on the streets of Nutley. And what was very exciting was in 1893, we had paved roads, and people went nuts about who got paved, whether it was us or Belleville, or who got that money. So it was a very exciting time. The town was really changing, and N.F. Carryl comes in and captures some really incredible moments in town. I'm going to say one or two things about some of these photographs after John's presentation, but I just want to kick this off by introducing John Demmer, Lost and Found Nutley, the Forgotten Photographs of N.F. Carryl. So, John Demmer.
Thank you so much. Very special thanks again to the Nutley Historical Society and John Simcoe especially. This was really his idea. That he saw the photos. He said, we have to do something with this. So very appreciative of that. Let me move this out of the way. And I am going to roll right into this because this is a long and interesting story. I know that some of you may have seen that on my postings that this is a story 50 years in the making, and that is not untrue. This started a while back. This collection has been with me for about 25 years. And the prior owner 25 years. And it all started in a little house on Center Street, which has since been torn down, and currently a new house is on it. But in this old house was a gentleman and his wife named Bill Smith and his wife. And I was doing carpentry work. I was an independent contractor at the time. And he said, you know, I'm doing all this work on the house, and they didn't have much money. The house was very, very old. I just come to find out tonight that it belonged at one point to the Frobos family, which everything in this town belonged to the Froboses at once. So he said, you know, I have these interesting boxes, and I bought them, you know, somewhere in a junk shop in Newark, somewhere around 1970 or so. Would you have any interest in them? And I said, well, I don't know. He said, I think some of them may be related to Nutley. So what we did was, when he brought them up, these were the boxes, and he actually had 3 of them. And a lot of them had paper sleeves on them, but they were very nondescript. This name N.F. Carryl came up, the words ring drill, and then some printing information, I guess, from the printing place. But I did see that 1 or 2 of them had relations to Nutley, so I said, you know what, we'll go for it. I'll do the work, and we'll trade it off. So it's what I like to call the John and the Beanstalk story, because whereas Jack's mother sent him out into the world to sell the family cow because they needed money for the home, I go to work one day with my family and wife totally expecting me to bring back money, and the story, the quick version of it is, you know, how did work go today, hon? Well, it went really well. She goes, did you ever get to do that Smith job? And I said, well, yes, I did. And she goes, that's terrific. How's it going? I said, well, I finished it. And she goes, well, that's even better. Did you get paid? I was like, yeah, I got some glass plate negatives. So silence, she turns, goes in the other room. So me being newly married, not knowing what that meant, I followed her in because she didn't understand. And I was like, but baby, there's a slim possibility that there may be Nutley images on here that if I can find a way to print them will be pretty cool. I've since learned that silence and walking away is your spouse's attempt to try not to kill you. So I have to give a lot of credit to this woman over here who puts up with all of this nonsense. But I did do the work. And I got the boxes. Now, Bill himself had tried. He was interested in photography, but he wasn't a photographer. He just saw these and thought they were cool negatives. He had no idea what they really were. So he tried to do what you call contact prints. And he only done a few, and he was getting some results, but he wasn't getting great results. And the way he told it to me was, he goes, I just got tired of it, and I just stopped working with them. So I have the collection now, and I thought, okay, let me give it a shot. Let's see what we could do to get some of these images. So I brought them, I searched all over for a film lab that could handle these, because these are 5x7 glass plate negatives. They are not, regular size. So I found a film lab, and these were the first attempts. Again, images, yes, but the quality was so low that I couldn't tell what was going on. So in anything that I do, and this goes for a lot of things, when you come across an issue, a problem, sometimes you just have to wait. Sometimes you just have to walk away. You have to say, okay, we're not ready for this yet. So that's what happened, because at the same time, you have to remember, I have a young family that's growing up. I'm my firstborn son, John, and my daughter, Emily. We have things to do. I had just amassed this amazing amount of postcards. That was my first introduction to Nutley history. Was I went around and I just started collecting postcards, and finally I had gotten so many of them that I was approached at a book show one day by Arcadia, and they said, would you like to do a book on Nutley? And I said, well, I have no idea how to do a book, but I'll give it a shot. And that book was very popular, and those images were very popular, that through efforts through the Van Steens and Fred Van Steen, who I miss very much, they went ahead and the commissioners agreed, and they made me only the second town historian for Nutley, which I was very proud of, and it was a wonderful thing. So life's full of highs and lows, though, and around this point was a low spot. My business wasn't doing well. Things were very tough. It was tough times. I was not doing well physically, and we lost our house. So that brings upon itself a lot of things. You have to put a lot of things on hold. So we did the right thing. We voluntarily surrendered it, and we went into a little apartment on Bloomfield Avenue. And we sort of regrouped there. I got a good steady job. My wife goes and takes 3 or 4 jobs. But moving from a house to apartment, what happens is your things go into storage. So now these glass plate negatives have to become a low priority, and they go into storage for almost 3 to 4 years. So eventually, through good fortune, we save money, and we end up buying the current house we have now, which has its own historic significance, which is a whole other story. And it's time to now revisit things. So we get everything out of storage, and these boxes pop up again. I go, oh my goodness, it's been what, maybe 10 years since I forgot them. I got to try again. We have to see what's going on. So that's when the second attempt happened. I figured years have gone by, printing technology has to have gotten better. So I take them back to another photo lab. These are professional photo labs now, and that's what I'm getting. And the problem with this is, yes, I'm getting some images, but it took 2 or 3 tries to get that one that way. It took 2 or 3 to get that one, and they're hitting me for $5, $10 a shot. So basically, it turns out where I can't afford to do this anymore. So there's some other ones. I mean, I knew the images are there, and I knew that they had to be better than what I was seeing. All right, so I tried again, and it just wasn't working. But the beauty The beautiful thing that happened was this around the time when digital technology was coming into the home. It had been around, but so I got my first scanner, and I thought, even at that time, I knew that somehow the answer to this was going to lie in this technology. This was going to be the answer. The problem is, with a normal scanner, you have a solid image, light beams up to it, and then the scanning head reads what's on it, you know, from that reflection. With glass plate negatives, you need the light to go through the image. It needs to be read in a different way, but I did give it a shot. I did try. So that's a glass plate negative sitting on the flatbed with a piece of white paper behind it. So I scanned it. Then I found a program where you could reverse the values. So I reversed all the values. And I got an image. And there were some imaging correction programs around, so I did that. Now I have a usable image, but again, I'm not happy with it. And this was a good one. There were some that were weak plates that were just, you know, corrupt or never developed properly. So this still, again, wasn't the answer. Now, when I had received my second scanner, it came with a very interesting little piece. Now, we're about another 5 years into this. And this was a film negative developer that came with my scanner. And what it was for 35 millimeter film, which is only about 1.5 inches tall. But they were leaning towards, scanning technology was leaning towards now being able to scan negatives. The problem was, since this was only for 35 millimeter film, and I have these gigantic 5x7 plates, even that wasn't the answer. The image, of course, is only 1.5 inches high out of this whole height, and the film sits into that piece differently than the glass does, so there's a lot of hazing, and I contemplated for a minute, you know, can I take 111 negatives and scan 5 pieces of each one and seam them together? And that wasn't the answer. It just, we were so close, but it wasn't happening. Again, you have to wait. You have to be patient with anything. If the answer's not there, just revisit it and come back. So time goes on, I'm doing my research, and at the very least, I'm learning more about the family. I'm learning more about the images. I'm learning more that, hey, a lot of these, actually the majority of them, are Nutley related. You know, I couldn't figure out who this Carryl guy was, but it started to become obvious through the research. Now, I had just finished on Facebook a very popular project called the Lambert Project, and I had these books from William Lambert, who's a famous architect from town, and everyone's interested in them. So I had found every image of every house that he had built, and a lot of them were unidentified. So I started putting them on Facebook, and we did something called the Lambert Project, and it became wildly popular. People were driving around neighborhoods. They're calling me 10 at night. I found this one on page 5, and it was so much fun. And we identified, I think, out of the 100 or so, I think we got about 80 solidly identified. And that was a really fun project to do. So when it was over, when I didn't have any more of that, I thought, well, what do I have that's interesting that people would get into? And I remembered the plates again. So I visited back again, and I went online, and I'm entering information about scanners, and there it is. It came up. It was a scanner that could do regular things, but it could do negatives, and it didn't just do 35 millimeter negatives. It could do anything up to 8x10, and I only had 5x7s. This was the answer. The problem, very expensive, really expensive. And I had promised ever since losing the first home that I had to make sure that family and things come first, because I don't get any budget as town historian. I do it out of, you know, love for the town. So I always had to budget things. So I only had about half the amount needed for this. So just as a random thing, and this wasn't a plea or anything, on July 10th, 2018, I just happened to mention it. I just randomly said, oh, you know, I have these 100 or so glass plate negatives. I'm trying to find the money to purchase the scanner, which I found. I will keep everyone informed on it. You know, if I do get the scanner, I will let you know. I'm trying to get some side work, it said, to see if I can make it happen. Within, I'd say, it was definitely less than a day, I was texted by Dr. Steve Clark. Now, Dr. Steve Clark is very interested in Nutley history. He has offices over on High Street, and he has all these wonderful photos of the train stations because his office is right across train stations. So basically, our conversation was 3 lines long. 2 of them were from him. He said, how much do you need? I told him the amount. and he said, come to my office Monday, there'll be a check there for you. So Monday comes, and I'm sleeping on his doorstep. I'm about as excited as I say to be, because now we're 23, 24 years into this, and the answer, it's close now. So, get the machine. Obviously, I must have gotten the machine on July 21st, because I wrote here that, thank Dr. Steve for all his help and everything, and mentioned that I would start working on these. I'd start working on these as soon as I could. And that was in July 21st, 2018. So, scanner comes in, sitting in my kitchen. I come home from work and it's right there. Now, of course, husband, father, responsibilities, I got to do all these things first while that's sitting there. So it was the longest day ever. But by about 8 o'clock, I got all my work done. I look over at my wife and I'm like, what could we do now? I got this scanner here. Maybe I'll run it upstairs and just unpack it or something. So boom, I go upstairs and I unwrap it. And of course, I don't read any directions because I've hooked up scanners before. And I go and I pick out a plate that I know is going to be phenomenal. It's the Kingsland Manor. I know that it's Nutley. I know that it's a great plate. I know that it's not degraded. So I put it on, set all the settings up, and here's my first scan of the Kingsland Manor. Panic mode. I don't know why, even at my age, my first thought was, what excuse am I going to tell Dr. Steve for this? I'm like, well, they take a while to develop. They're all night shots. I calmed down and I read the directions. And what it turns out is that on a negative scanner, what you have to do is there's a plate, there's a piece up here, this doesn't work on that, that when you do negatives, the light, it turns on this light, shines through the negative to the reader head, which is below. I had left the black cover on here. So, I'm calm now. I'm not panicking as much, and then I go, okay, well let's see what happens when you take the lens cover off this camera. Let's see if. So then I did my first real scan, and that was it. It was the most beautiful image. The quality, the clarity, the field of depth, everything from here to that manor was in perfect focus. It was a beautiful picture. So, and there's image correcting technology on this. So now if something's too dark because, when it was first done and the lighting wasn't right, you could actually correct and bring everything out. I didn't have to do much on this one. This one was just beautiful right out the box. So I figured there's 111 of them. The rate that it took me to scan this one and color correct, I was like, well, if I do 2 hours a night, they take about 2 weeks to get them all done. So 3 sleepless days later, they're all done. My boss got nothing from me that week. So these are just some of the other images that aren't on here, but this is the front of the Kingsland house, not the Kingsland Manor. We're going to talk about the people involved in this, and this was their house, which is where the Corks Mad Rug Place is, and I think Beauty Bridge is where it is now. It's the corner of Kingsland and Passaic. So that's where their house was. This is a beautiful shot of a lemon tree that were growing in Nutley that they were going to do in their garden. Joseph Kingsland III, who lived in this wood house, had a brother, Richard, and they were co-owners of a paper mill, which was right across the road from the Kingsland Manor. And they were in that mill, and this is a picture of their mill building. They also had another interest. Again, it was across the county line. It was in Clifton, but it was the Kingsland Ice House. And the idea was you cultivated ice from a lake during the winter months, and if you stored it properly, and the building is in back there, you could actually keep ice for almost up to a year if you covered it in hay, had it in this windowless building. So that was another interest that they had. Beautiful willow tree. These images were just popping. This is not the Kingslands, but there's other family members that are related to them through marriage. This is the Akrig house, which is also in Clifton. And look at the wealth that was around for this family in 1890. We have wallpaper borders. The ceiling is wallpapered and bordered. Look at the beautiful lighting, the furniture, the mantle. Definitely, even when the Kingslands themselves, even when their relatives went out to marry, they always seem to marry in the same kind of thing. I don't know what the two, Blair Witch kind of don't, face the wall kind of thing is, but there are two people here and they're facing the other way. I have no idea what they did to not be worthy to be in this shot. This is a phenomenal shot too. This is the corner now of Passaic Avenue in Kingsland, okay? And you're looking down Kingsland towards Franklin. Those three houses still exist. They still exist. So this is the corner of the Kingsland Farm. So across the street are those houses. Just a terrific shot. This is an actual Kingsland house parlor. At first I thought I was getting the impression it was sort of Oriental design, but it's not. I don't know what the design is. The reason I show you the shot is because something really interesting about it, and John Simcoe picked up on this. He goes, look on the mantle. He said, well, what's on the mantle? So I blew it up. Two of the images he has taken that's in this collection are printed and up on the mantle in another picture that he has taken. So I thought that was that's like home run for a historian. This is a wonderful shot. It took me a while to figure out what this was because it just said White Bridge, Nutley. I didn't know what that meant. I knew it had to be close to the Kingsland property because that's where most of these are from. This is, okay, so you're going down Passaic Avenue. Just as you get to Rutgers, there's the bridge that crosses over the water. So you could come out of Yannicall School here. That house is still there. It's a beautiful white house. I think it's 585 Passaic Avenue, where he has maintained it as if it is still in the 1800s. The brackets are on, you'll know it once you see it. Drive down Passaic Avenue. So that's the bridge that right near Yannicall School and Rutgers, if it had come through, would be in that area. So just a gorgeous shot. Here's two young boys somewhere on Third River. This one was titled Road to Nutley. I'm assuming it's Passaic Avenue, and it's probably where the river is very close to it, so I'm going to assume it's where there's that one spot on Passaic where the river comes very close to Passaic Avenue. I'm assuming it's that. Cornfield. Who knows? But you can imagine seeing cornfields in Nutley? It's just unbelievable. And the fact that he sat and just decided to take that image in itself is an incredible story. This is part of their property. You can barely see, but there's a structure back there. This is like a park. This is absolutely beautiful. This is their property again with the full, beautiful trees. They seem to be younger trees too, so I don't know if they were landscaped in at some point. This one, can't identify. You tell me where it is. There's a structure in back. There's a telephone pole, so that would lead me to believe again that we must be on Passaic Avenue somewhere, or possibly Kingsland. But I just thought it was it's frustrating when you can't tell where a shot is, but it's also very interesting and nice to be able to say, wow, this is somewhere in Nutley, but who knows where. And then one other thing I wanted to show you was they took a longer shot of that first shot where I showed you the three houses. And this was another bonus gem that we got from this collection. This shot has these two houses here. Now, I had known about that house on the right for a while now because it had special interest to Nutley. The owner of that house at one point was one of the first printers of a Nutley newspaper that eventually became the Nutley Sun. But at the time that the gentleman published the paper from this house, which does not look like this at all today, none of that detail work is there, his paper was called The Rising Sun. Do you see where that might have come from? What a great tie-in to know that the guy, so I never thought about where Rising Sun came from. Then I find out that this picture is part of this collection, and here's the house with the Rising Sun on it. I actually only have ever seen one copy. I have it in my collection. It was a very simple newspaper that folded, it was one big piece of paper folded, and that's where the Rising Sun started, which became our Nutley Sun. So, all these have been digitized, all have been saved, and they are now, thankfully, on flash drives, and obviously many of them have been printed. Now I want to talk briefly about picture taking and the changes that have happened, because we're going to do this whole story is very circular. It's going to talk about different aspects of things now, things then, and it's all going to tie back into Carryl. But briefly on picture taking, that's just a bunch of images. I want to show you something real quick with, let's see, here's my phone. Okay, watch this. Everybody stay still. I just took 42 pictures of you, okay? Now, while I'm gonna love and cherish them all, delete all. That's a lot of pictures in that short amount of time. And I think what's happened is that we've lost something in the ability to do that, because I think with every advancement, there's a sacrifice. And I just want to talk about what I think that sacrifice is, what we're giving up in photography and picture taking. The first thing is investment. Now you might say, well, what's bad about, you know, having a cheaper way of taking pictures? And I guess the argument to that is, well, no, there's nothing bad about that, except that I was always taught that something that you bought was much more valuable to you than something that was given to you. So there's investment in photographs. And it doesn't just mean money. It means time, the time that you put in. And it's the thought, effort, and care. And I think we're starting to lose that now. I think what happens is we're taking pictures, and my wife and I are just as guilty as, you know, take a bunch, we'll look through them later and get rid of the ones. We are taking too many pictures and weeding them out instead of seeking the picture that we want, which should be special. So it's that thought, effort, and care that we have sacrificed. We've given up on it. Here's my camera memories when I was a kid. Now my favorite camera, there was 35s and there was 110s, but boy, I had the old 110. And this was a special thing to me. This meant something to me because it was an investment. I had to, you had to take care of it. And the 110, obviously when you had it, you had to get yourself the 110 film, which is a little double humpback thing, and film was on one side, and as you did it, it would go to the other side until you got to the end. And you'd open up this sort of paper foil type thing to get the film out, and for some reason, even though it was terrible, you'd smell it. I don't know why. There's nothing good about it. And you'd put it in, and you'd click the camera, you'd advance it, and it would stop, and then you knew you were ready. You knew you were ready. Now, mine didn't have an electronic flash, so of course now your investment got even greater, because what did you have to get? Cubes. For people who don't know what this is, you actually had to put one of these on here, snap it on here, and there were 4 flashes in it, and a little battery inside would spark something and ignite the filament that's in there, and that was your flash. And you advance your camera, and it would turn 1/4 turn, and you had 4 shots per cube to get the flash on. So again, it's a lot of work. And at the time, 35 millimeter and 110, you had your choice of 12, 24, or 36 exposures. Now, while this might not sound like a problem, it led to 2 very interesting things, especially as a kid who had to pay for his own film and develop it. If you got up to 12, you had to be really particular about what you wanted to do, because it's only 12 shots. So you had to really filter, you had to figure out what you wanted. You know, I could have friends say to me, "Hey John, look what your dog's doing." And I'd be like, "Oh, I only got 2 shots left. My birthday's coming up. I kind of want to get that. Yeah, if there was a ring of fire, yeah, but I'm going to pass on this one." Where consequently, the 36 led to a whole different problem. You don't want to run through them because that was more expensive. But then you had the issue of you can't see what you took till the 36th one was done. So I swear to you, I think we had one year where I actually had 2 Christmases on the same roll of film. I want you to think of the implications of that. It means I only took 36 pictures in 1 year. I just took 42 of you now. So that was the thing with, you had to decide which size film you were going to use. Now after that, you had to figure out what to do with it, because you didn't just look at your pictures after you took it, you had to bring it somewhere. So locally, we had Nutley Camera. I think Belleville had Milts. I forget what I used because I was born and raised in Newark. If you didn't want to go to Nutley Camera, there was a very interesting business that went around for a while, a photomat. You could drive up to it, hand in your film, they'd give you a time and a date to come pick it up, you drive back. Or this very interesting thing, which I have tried, and I didn't know it was local until I started researching this. Does anyone remember 15-cent photo? What a trip this was. So you just took this valuable, this thing that's going to cost you money, you put it in an envelope and you just say, "Good luck, film. I'm sending you out to the US mail." But sure enough, it did work. They sent it back, and you got to see your prints. Now, if you were dropping it off at like Nutley Photo or Nutley Camera or things like that, when it was time, they would call you, and you had to have this little tag, which was attached to the top. Now, for those who don't remember, this is the little tag that you would lose 5 steps outside of the camera shop. This thing would never be around. And you really had to go to a place you knew, because if you lost the tag, if it was a place that didn't know you, there was like this interrogation, like, well, you know, how do I know these are your photos, sir? Well, I'm in 45% of them, you know. They're either my photos or I have a very dedicated stalker. So you get your envelope, and my pictures would typically come in an envelope like this, which you would open up, and immediately all the negatives would spill on the floor. That was part of the process. That was part of the dance. But you had to save them, because if you wanted another copy, it wasn't a matter of hitting a button. You had to take those film negatives back to the place, and they would make more pictures from it. But that would spill all over the floor. That was a given. Now the problems. All this time and waiting and all this and that, the first thing you're going to see is all the bad shots you just took and waited, you know, months to get. Too much flash. Oh, Mom, my eyes were closed. You know, that's actually me. Ah, we cut John's head off. I can't believe it. Ah, too blurry. And then there's the Demmer family standard. Is there film in this camera? Is this on? That's 3 different members of my family at 3 different times. We know my daughter has done this. We can't find hers. We think she has hid it to disassociate herself from our family and our tragic picture taking. So, but then the good ones. Look, there's me and my new girlfriend Cindy. There's my brothers. There's Mom and Grandma and great-grandma. I only have a few pictures of her. Look at the kids being so nice, you know, handing off the Christmas star. That was the payoff. You sacrificed your money, you sacrificed your time, you waited patiently, but then when you got the good image, it was special. It's not like today. I think it's very different today. And we didn't take our pictures and upload them to some cloud somewhere, whatever that even means. I don't even know what that means anymore. You know what we did with them? Put them in an album. And the albums I grew up with were my parents' albums and my grandparents' albums, which were sort of like these black construction paper. And you'd actually have to take these little corners and you would glue them. And then you'd fold your picture to go, you know, and it would snap into those corners there. Of course, when I was, you know, my age, I had the Mylar ones, and those were the clear Mylar sheet, and on the back were those ribs of sticky stuff. And that's how I put most of mine in, and that was an excellent system for about 3 years. And then one day you go to pick up the album, and they all just tinkle out like this because that sticky stuff was no longer sticky. But that's what you did. And what did you do with your albums? You didn't send them to your friends. You didn't hit a button and say, "Come, you know, look at this. You're across the town over there. Look at this." You know what you did? You invited them over, and you took out your album, and you sat down, and you said, "Here, come sit on the couch. Sit next to me. Let's look at these images that I got. You know, some of them are very special. Let's look at them together." So, if you're my age and you've been through this, same as myself, consider yourself lucky, because now, yes, we do have the ability to take fast, easy, cheap pictures. But if you're my age, you'll remember and you'll get the good feelings about the thought, skilled, and earning of the image that you got, because you worked for it, and you waited for it, and you suffered for it. So consider yourself lucky to know both worlds, because I think a lot of the young folks today don't understand about earning a good shot. So while a cell phone is considered the modern achievement of the modern world, and it's the link to the social media, there are times where I can't think of a less social device than a cell phone, because it has taken us away, at least in picture taking, from the idea of getting together. Let's talk a little bit now about our photographer, our friend, N.F. Carryl, Nathan Frederick Carryl, 1855 to 1906, died very young, 51. What a shame. What a really interesting guy. He was a printer by trade. And when I was doing some research for something else, I had these town committee reports, 1876, 77, and 80, and he was the printer for them. I was really thrilled by that. And at the end there, it says N.F. Carryl steam printer. So that must have been a new technology, probably steam-driven machines to do the printing. So he was a printer by trade. He was an inventor. This is a patent that he created. I've read the description 15 times, can't quite figure out what it is, but he invented it. It has something to do with dispersing paint, and that's a rotary brush. And if you look at the actual patents, the very first line of it, first of all, the patent's dated January 10th, which is my birthday, which is a nice treat from him. Thank you, Frederick. And it was the assigner to James R. Hay. So from my understanding, my limited understanding of patents, I think he invented it for James R. Hay. I think he was the assigner. So it must have been something Hay needed, and we'll talk about Hay a little bit more. That's another Nutley name. He was also a writer. NF was a writer. He wrote 2 stories that I found so far. They were more children's stories, and one of them was published in this St. Nicholas magazine of 1892. This is the book which we have here, which has the whole year in it. And one of his stories was called Experiments in Kite Flying, and was talking about building this gigantic kite with this long, like 50-something foot tail on it, and you know, all the process to it. And when I saw this sketch, I flipped out, because I had known that in the collection was that picture. There is no doubt in my mind when he wrote that story that he went to the illustrator and said, can you take this, can you do an illustration of this kite from that picture? I mean, it's just, so another very odd tie-in with this collection and something else that he did. What we're really celebrating him for, though, today is photography. A couple people have come up to me and said, oh, he's a professional photographer. And I said, no, he's not. He's a printer. This is a hobby for him. And I can't think of someone who could do a better job once you view these photos. Just a very quick, this is a very truncated line, but I'm just trying to show you how Frederick got into the Kingsland family. Joseph Kingsland III lived in that wood house we talked about on Kingsland and Passaic. He married a Margaret E. Stewart, and they had, one of their children was a daughter, Martha, and that's who Frederick married. So Frederick married Martha, who was Joseph Kingsland III's daughter. And then Frederick and Martha, NF and Martha had 2 children, Frederick and Marjorie. Now Joseph Kingsland III lived in that wood house. He was born 1813, died 1899, and as we mentioned before, he and his brother, Richard, owned the paper mills. Very, very popular paper mills, went on for years, and I think eventually that whole paper making process was sort of rolled into Lamont paper. And then here's a better shot of that ice house, and consequently this is also that picture that was on the mantle in the earlier shot. This was the photo that was up there. So that's the ice house in the back. This is called the Lower Mill Dam. It took me up until a year and a half ago to figure out where that was. That is in Clifton, where Route 3 overpass crosses over River Road, as if you're going to Rutt's Hut, which probably was around then too. All right, so as we mentioned, Joseph married Margaret E. Stewart. What's funny about these family names is that Joseph and Frederick and Richard, they all get mixed up amongst the men, and it's like different combinations. And for the women, it was always Margaret's and Martha's, where there was a ton of Margaret's and Martha's, and John and I were kind of laughing at the fact that it's too bad her turn wasn't to be Martha, because then we would have 2 Martha Stewarts to claim fame to. But it didn't work out. So they lived, here's their property. So I'm just going to point this and I'll step out of the way. Passaic Avenue, Kingsland, those are those old houses we were looking at across the street. Big semicircular driveway, huge property, gigantic. Elm really was just, this map's 1906. So earlier, Elm wasn't even there. Elm looks like it's designated as a new street. So their property was huge. And again, this is the front of their house, which is not the Kingsland Manor. It is the wood house that was at Passaic and Kingsland. So N.F. Carryl marries Joseph Kingsland's daughter, Martha. And they lived on Rutgers Place. They had a home up there. And another quick interesting story is John Simcoe was going, I thought Place always meant that a street didn't go through, and Rutgers goes through to Passaic. But then we looked, and sure enough, Rutgers Place did not carry through to Passaic. So Passaic, Rutgers I think makes a little curve here, and Passaic would be here, and the Kingslands would be up there on that side. So that's where the Carrolls lived. They had 2 children, Frederick K. Carroll. The K stands for Kingsland. A lot of times they would try to work in some of the other the family names into the middle name, but that was their only son. And then they had one daughter, Margaret, who on most of the film sleeves was noted as Marjorie. And this is her on her horse, which of course every kid has. It's good to be rich. Other names that you'll see in the collection I thought were totally disassociated from Nutley, and it turns out they're not. It's just through marriages. So there was the Akriggs. They had a wonderful mansion over in Clifton, and those are the ones I showed you, the parlor that had the wallpaper on it, and that came through Frederick, N.F. Carroll's sister married into the Akrigg family, which was well-to-do. There's the Brownlee family. So Joseph Kingsland had his daughter, Martha, and this is Martha's sister on the right. And that's little Marjorie. She's a little older now, so she's hugging her aunt. So her aunt was a Kingsland, but married a man named Brownlee, and that's where that name came from. And then the last name that comes up is Hay, which is very well known around town. And before you get into the Hays, this is one of the nicest shots I have ever seen. You guys know where this house is now? This house is the one that's way down on Calico Lane. It is absolutely gorgeous. It's the Hay Mansion. At one time, they owned so much property. So if you can imagine where that house is now, way down that far, this was considered a Passaic Avenue address. That's how much property they had. And James R. Hay, he owned a considerable amount of property in Nutley. He was mostly noted for being a developer of property, but he also owned, interestingly enough, the Nutley Water Company, which was right at the head of where the mud hole is in that area. Right in the mud hole area was a natural spring that came up, and Hay actually provided water for a very small section of town for a while. I think in 1896 or so, the waterworks were sold to the town of Franklin, but Hay was involved in that. And again, another very well-to-do person that came into the family. The way Hay came into the family is that Joseph III, who lived in our wood house, had a brother, Richard. They owned the mills together. Richard's daughter, Sarah, married James R. Hay. Okay? And the Hays actually had a couple children, and you can see two of them here. John and I fully suspect that this is Richard Hay and Philip Hay. Here's our family, our Carroll family. There's the little girl Marjorie, and there's little Frederick with this, looks like his little Civil War kind of cap on. The unfortunate thing about the Hay children is the one on the right, Philip Hay, died very young. He died around 20 years old. He drowned in an accident. And I think John's going to speak more about the Hay family. There's actually a tribute to him over in Grace Church. My interest in this whole thing, the thing where I really got pulled in the most, was with Marjorie, little Marjorie. Many of the pictures were of her, and they sort of spanned this time frame from around 5 years old to maybe 12, we figure. And there was just something about her, something, in most of the photos you will see, she is very well posed. She is looking at the camera. I think her father, John mentioned this, her father probably taught her well how to take a picture. But the real thing that I think that bonded me to Marjorie was that around the same time, I had a daughter. And my daughter was around the same age as Marjorie. And the time that I was doing most of the research were the same years that I had these photos of Marjorie and my daughter getting older. So there was a very strong link, a connection for me to Marjorie. And that leads me to the quick story of a little girl, which if you've known me, I've told this story before, and I'm sorry I tell it so much, but it talks about something about research. I've been working with this collection for years and years and years already. I had found out about the family. I was getting occasional photos, even if they weren't great, I was still seeing, and I would see so much of Marjorie as a little girl, playing on the hay wagon, out in the field, sitting with her brother, standing by a bicycle. And I can't tell you what happens, but there's sort of this imaginary bond, like you're watching your daughter grow up, and you're like, oh, look, Marjorie's the same age as my daughter is now. And I ended up doing some research for something else, and it was so unrelated to this, and I'm in the library, and I'm going through microfilms, because that's the way you had to do it, nothing was digitized. I'm looking for something totally random, and it hit Marjorie's obituary. Now, the logical side of me said, well, Yeah, she died, of course. It's 1970. She would have been 87 years old, whatever. But the involvement that I had for all these years couldn't let me figure that out. And I started to cry. I had tears in my eyes because I had only known Marjorie as a little girl. I had never seen a picture of her old. And in my mind, I was like, how could this little girl be dead? And it was a very, believe me, it was a very weird day. And I don't know if that says something good or bad about me, but I was like broken up to see her obituary, even though I know she had to have been gone by this point. And the odd thing is, as I just mentioned, I've never seen a picture of her as an adult. But 2 months ago, I wrote MKA, where Marjorie had taught, and said, could you go through her yearbooks, the yearbooks of the school, and see if she's in there? And the first person looked, and they called me back and said, not in there. And I said, well, there must be something. She taught there for years. So they handed it off to someone else. And they looked, and they said, nope, she's mentioned, no photos. So 10 days before this program, the third person calls me, says, I was just handed this note about trying to find out about Marjorie. And I said, well, you know, the people have looked. In the meantime, I was going on eBay and I was writing everybody that had an MKA yearbook for sale. I wrote every single one of them, said, please, I need a picture of this person. I have to see what she looked like. Nothing. Well, this guy wrote me back. He says, I'm going to try. He goes, but it's the first day of school. You got to give me some time. And I said, well, I really don't have time, but if you find something, I want to know. He went out of his way, and his name, I want to give him credit, Thomas Ruddy. He found a photo. He found a photo of 3 teachers standing together. And on the back, he said her name was on it. He goes, but unfortunately, the people are left to right, and the names are written top to bottom. So he goes, I just don't know which one's Marjorie, to which I said, don't worry, I do. I've known this girl for 25 years. So I am really touched to see and to know, to see, from what I understand from the school, she taught for many years. She was well loved. She never married. She died at 87. She lived a good, full, happy life. And that's Marjorie as an adult, the only picture I know of her. All right, before we get to NF Carroll's photography, let's just talk very quickly about early photography. Early photography was very difficult. The first process photography was called wet plate photography. You actually had to take chemicals and put them on a piece of glass, and before these chemicals dried, you had to get them into your camera, and most of this work was done in a darkroom. Very, very difficult. Some of the famous wet plate photographers that we've known about are Matthew Brady, who did all these Civil War photographs, and also Alexander Gardner, who was a famous portrait photographer, did a lot of wet plate work. This is supposedly the last portrait ever done of Lincoln, and the plate had cracked, and supposedly Gardner was heard to say, well, it doesn't matter, there's plenty of time to get some more later. So that was wet plate, which is an extremely difficult process. Now, fortunately, in 1871, Dr. Richard Maddox invented the dry plate. And by, I think it was 1880, Kodak had picked up on that. And dry plate changed everything, because now the chemicals would be put on the glass, they were dry, you could store them for a while, and then when you needed to use them, you could take them out and put them in your camera. Of course, all of this had to be done in darkroom setting. It says right on the box, you must open this in darkroom, because these are light-sensitive plates. So the light-sensitive plates also had to go into a special carrier, which I'll show you in a minute how it worked. And all of that had to be done with a special lantern, which was a darkroom lantern, which had, of course, the red light that we've always heard about, that you could only work with unexposed film with with red light. So this is the kind of things that they would have when they had to do that kind of work. This is the camera that we'll be featuring on today. It's not the exact one that NF had. I tried to find the one that he had, but I sent it to a bunch of people. No one could really identify it. And before we go into how he took photographs, the question comes up, well, is it really important to know how to take a glass plate photograph? And the short answer is, of course not. You will not find yourself in an emergency situation tomorrow amongst people who go, my God, is there anyone here who knows how to take a glass plate photograph? You're not going to be that hero. It's not going to happen. But if you don't repeat these processes, then you tend to forget things and you lose the history of it. There is a phenomenal movie that I watch all the time called Avalon, and it follows this patriarch from this family from when he comes to America in 1914 all the way up to the end of his life. And the whole story of the movie, which you must watch, is about how families used to sit around tables and tell stories, and that's how you learned your history. And it shows the influence of TV sort of breaking that up. And it follows this generations and how things change, how the stories change and things get lost. And at the end of the movie, the patriarch is in a nursing home. He's got the onset of Alzheimer's, and his grandson, who is a full-grown man at this point, comes to visit him. And the grandfather sits and he says, I remember the last time I was out of this place, I went to go see all the places that were part of my youth, and they were all gone. This was gone, the stores were gone. And he says the most poignant line, which just tugs at your heart. He says, if I knew things would no longer be, I would have tried to remember better. And I think that's so important. You have to keep the memories alive. You have to tell the stories. You have to sit down and give the history. So that's why I feel it's really important that maybe we take a little time out just to see what this guy had to go through, so that some point in the future you can say, yeah, you know what, I did see a demonstration of how photography was done, and this is sort of how it was done. The camera we're using is a Cycle Poco 3. It's very common for the time. It's built out of solid mahogany, has highly polished brass on it. The bellows are Russian red leather lined with gossamer cloth. Wow, that's pretty nice. And it's quite a handy little camera. And this one is a 5x7 format, which is the same one that N.F. Carryl used, because most of his plates, the majority of them, are 5x7. I do want to give special credits to the written words of Len Nassman. This is what I'm talking about. I went online easily expecting how to find out how to use this camera, because it's the internet. Everything's on the internet. It was incredibly hard, scary hard, that this kind of stuff wasn't documented, until I stumbled on his site, and he's not even a camera guy. He has 12 different stories, and one of them just happens to be on how to take photographs with a glass plate negative camera, which I have printed out for those of you who are interested in photography. I have that whole thing printed out, but I want to give him a lot of thanks for this. So let's talk about what N.F. Carryl had to do to take an image. You know, I took 42 of you, but that was easy. What he had to do was a little harder. So the first thing you had to do was you had to get your glass plates. Now for this point where I'm standing here, we are in a dark room. We open up our box of glass plates and we take one out. These are completely light sensitive, so they must be in a dark room condition. So we have our glass plate, and then inside the camera pack that you were carrying, the camera and all these holders fit in that, was these plate holders. You could only take as many pictures for the day, as many as you fill these up. You know, so however many of these, that's what pictures you were doing for the day, because you had to load these up in a dark room. Now what's interesting about these is they are two-sided. So there's a side here with a door on it, flip it, and there's a side here. So what you would do is you'd slide open this door, and there's a little hinged piece of wood here, and we're in our dark room, and we're going to take our glass plate, and we're going to keep the emulsion side, the side with the chemicals, which you could tell will be the least shiny side, and we're going to put that in there facing forward. Then we close our little door here, and we shut this door here. Now this is light protected. Nothing can hurt it. We do it, flip it over, we do the same thing. So now we have the ability to take 2 pictures. I have another one in there. That would mean if I filled that one, we have the ability to take 4 pictures. So now we go to our site, and we have to set up our camera. So we have our plates there, they're ready to go. The camera itself is very interesting. There are guidelines on it. There are things here that say, well, you know, if your subject is this far away, slide these bellows, you know, forward or backward, which this can slide forward or backward. And there's a little level here, and there's a little sight glass here. So the first thing you do is, the idea is to try to get a rough idea of who you're taking your photo of, get the camera basically aimed at them. Then, there's a section here where you can force this to be open so that light comes through it. There's nothing in here. There's no plates in here or anything now. And You know the iconic black cloth that we always see in cartoons? I asked my daughter about it. I said, do you know what the black cloth is? And she goes, all I know is when Daffy Duck goes under it, he comes out exploded. So the cloth was very important for a couple reasons. When you were changing your plates over, you kind of did it through here to help limit the chance. Light will hurt you in the changing of any of this. The second reason was your only ability to focus was on the back of this is ground glass, which we might know as sandblasted glass, which means you can't see through it, but you could project something on it. So what the photographer would do is he'd open up this lens fully to let all the light in that he could, and he would put this over his head, and he would look, and a slight vague image that he was looking at would be cast onto the ground glass. And he had to base all of his fine focus just on what he saw there. So he'd kind of look at the outer edges of the image and kind of figure, okay, I got to bring this in, I got to bring this out, and just get it just right, based on a fuzzy piece of, a fuzzy image projected onto ground glass. It seems almost impossible. So then you would shut this, and you would click this shut now and set it up to take a photo. Now the next thing that you have to consider, and this is where the magic comes in, this is where I don't understand how he does it, but cameras, to simplify it the most, and if there are camera people here, they can correct me or add to this when we're done. I'm not a camera expert at all. But the camera, you have your f-stop, which is the amount of light coming in, and you have your shutter speed. And what that really boils down to is two things. How long, how fast? How long is this going to be open for light to come in, or how much and how fast, I'm sorry. How much light's going to come in, and how fast do I stop and start that light? And you would think to yourself, well, that should just be really easy. If it's very bright out, you want to go fast, and you don't need the opening to be that much. And then consequently, if things change, you'd open more here and keep it open longer. Seems like a no-brainer. It doesn't work that way because there's something called field of depth, which this photographer has an incredible field of depth ability to do that. That's where you can get something in focus that's here, but also 20 yards away. And to do that, you have to find the absolute perfect balance of how much light and how long. And it's not easy to do. There's no books for this. He must have practiced this. He must have had a real eye for it. So you would do your settings up here, then how long we're going to do it for, and we'd set our settings here for how much light's coming in. Once all that's set, then we come back and we take, now we have our glass plates in here. There is a springy door on this. If I pull it and let it go, it wants to spring back. Well, you pull that just enough, and this is where you need 3 hands. And now we're loading that in there. Now this is pulled tight to it, so we're light tight again. This is shut up here, so no light's coming in. And then what you do now is you just take this little door out. Now, our plate is in there in a light sensitive, in a light protected area. There's no light coming in. And once we get ready for the shot, all we have to do is press the plunger and let light in. So you set all your settings, and just like MF Carroll there, we're gonna take our picture. Wait. Then you'd squeeze the bulb, and there's 2 little hydraulics, and that's it. You took your picture. Oh. She just took 42 pictures of it. Learned absolutely nothing from the stuff. That's what it would take. So now this one has been exposed. So now before you do anything, you must shut this again, so it's protected. Now you can take this out, and you can flip it over, slide it in again, and you repeat the process. And hopefully you had somehow, and I've seen these on ones that I bought all the time, I see all these hand-carved markings in here, and that must be from experience of saying, did I do this one already or not? Because if you put it in a second time, you're going to get a double exposed image. But that's what it took to take a picture. It was not easy. So much of it was guesswork. So much of it is, and now you take this, and it's in its light protected case, and you put it in, and now you have to go to your darkroom, because you're still not done with this process. So the darkroom process has not changed for years. You use a developer, a stop, and a fixer. The developer starts the developing process, the stop stops the developing process, and the fixer washes away all the other chemicals so that when you are done, you have a negative that you can now take and hold out in the light. It is no longer light sensitive. And then making prints, very simple. These were called large format because 5x7 is pretty large. They also had cameras that did 8x10 glass. You would just take light sensitive paper to your dark room, put the light sensitive paper down, take the negative and literally put it on top of the paper, and it's going to be the opposite process. Anything that's, once you shine light through that, anything that's dark will be light, and anything that's light will be dark. And then you get your image. And if you timed it right, but there was also timing with that too. You couldn't let too much light come through, so I'm sure the whole thing was a humongous learning curve on this. Now, when it comes to these negatives, again, I'm either weird or sensitive or whatever. I overthink things, and I tend to put personal attributes to physical things and sort of give them their own life and put, give them qualities, human qualities. And there's some kind of technical English word for that. I think it's crazy, something like that. When I hold these negatives, it makes me think of a couple things. It takes a particle of light leaving the sun travels 93 million miles to get to Earth. When we look at these negatives, forget the prints right now, the negatives, you've got to remember they were there in real life. The photographer handled them and they sat across from the people that they photographed. And you got to think that this 93 million mile travel to hit the faces of these human beings and to bounce into this camera all happened in reality, and these were there. I still get goosebumps when I think about how this process happens and how it's perfect. Not the picture's not perfect, but the capturing of it. The camera doesn't lie. These people lived and died, and this 1/100th of a second for this light that traveled 93 million miles is caught on here forever. And it's perfect. And it's real. And other than DNA, I can't think of how you could capture the essence of a person more than with a photograph like this and with these glass plate negatives. So there's a lot of, a lot of personal feelings about that. And to wrap this up, I just want to say, because John's going to say a few things, and then we're going to have you guys walk around the gallery. Please, even if you've walked around the gallery before, walk around now, because I want you to take what we've talked about today and take it with you. John and I could have easily said to this program, we have some old pictures of some guy who took some shots in Nutley, come in and see them. And you come in and see them, and you would admire them the same. I want you to now think about what it took to get these images, how much work, how much chance, how much it could have all gone wrong. In the, what I like to say about this is that I still collect. I do a lot of collecting. This is I call my Nutley in my New Jersey room. I collect maps, books, images, anything that has special meaning. I like mechanical items. I start to refurbish them. But when it comes to personal stuff like this collection, I just want to say that you get really tied into something like this. These have been with me for 25 years, almost half my life. And I did take it seriously about getting them done, but I didn't do it really fast. And I was doing some research recently where someone said something that kind of changed my whole perspective. I was doing some research on this person who has a Nutley tie-in, but she's not from Nutley. It's too long of a story to go into. But in doing this research, I found out that this is an incredibly important person. And she should be recognized for these things that she did, not locally, not state, nationally. So I started doing research, and I started collecting things from her, and I started collecting images, and I started contacting family and museums and saying, does anyone know about this, and was getting nothing. And then out of the blue one day, a dealer calls me. The dealer of, he goes out and buys huge collections. I thought at first he was trying to sell me stuff. He goes, are you doing the research on Bleecker? You're the guy? And I said, yeah. He goes, well, I have all this stuff from her family, not just her family, directly, but the people she married into, which had its own stories and own importance. He says, are you having any luck finding anyone to show any interest in this woman? I said, no, I'm not. I said, what about you? He says, no, I've contacted families, museums. He goes, something has to be done about this. And I said, yeah, well, here's what I'm doing. And I explained what I was trying to do to get recognition for this. And towards the end of our long talk, he said a phrase to me that changed everything for me. He said, isn't it funny how you find yourself to be the caretaker of someone else's memories? And that hit me that that's what's happening sometimes. I had these plates for years through moving, through losing a home, through all kinds of situations. And I was responsible for them. They only existed with me. If something had happened, it would have been my fault, and these wouldn't be around anymore. And it made me realize the importance of research and taking care of things and trying to do the best that you can to preserve them. Might sound silly, but these images, these glass plates they've been like a child for me. I was responsible for them solely. They were in my care. I had to make sure that they didn't get hurt or broken or stolen or taken by someone. And now that this project's completed, there's this huge relief about it's done. And the child has grown up, and you can let it out on its own because it's safe, it's protected now. I have these copied. I have sent copies of these to multiple places. They are now printed on the walls here. And it's a little sad because, like a child leaving, that I have to move on to other things. This project is done now. But the care that I give to things now is much more focused when I realize that if I'm the only one who has this, I better do the best to my ability to protect it and preserve it so that it is around for the future. Otherwise, all this work that N.F. Carryl put into this would have been lost, and none of us would have seen it. So in closing, I just want to say thank you so much for being a part of this journey, this 25-year trip for me, this 50-year trip for these images, in that now you are part of the history too, because you were the first group to really see these images probably in 100 years or so. And I just want to give you a heartfelt thanks for really listening to me, listening to this story, and I hope that you did find some interest in it. Thank you. And then we would like you to invite you to walk around again, please.
John, how long have I known you?
Forever.
Well, I knew Marjorie Carroll, and you were saying you were trying for a picture. I have a picture of the two of us.
Do you?
Marjorie.
Well, you know where I'll be this afternoon.
So very briefly, while John's putting in a couple of images, because I've got an opposite story about doing research on with just text of a young child, and then after all of it, finding his image in the negatives that John was able to get in touch with. So he's going to load that up. But I just want to mention two photos, and keep this in mind as you go around to look at them today. So Carryl captures all these great images, but seems to do a little bit more, at least with any ones that we've sort of scratched the surface with. This looks like a picture of the old trestle that went over the St. Avenue. It's still there today, but what you'll notice when you come up here is how short these pilings are. They've got this rather spindly metal column that comes up on the top. What this is Carryl has captured the image when they needed to, if you're on on Franklin, by Jim Gandy's, and you're going underneath the railroad track. Well, those used to cross at grade level until they realized accident waiting to happen. So when they raised that bridge over Franklin Avenue, they needed to raise this from this level up to this as well. If you go there today, you'll see these have been replaced by very tall concrete piling. So this is not only a picture of the bridge, of course, that meant the Erie Railroad that would take N.F. Carryl into Manhattan into his job, as it took a lot of other artists and writers and professional people in Nutley, but it also captures that moment in a very short amount of time. This is going away, and the new pilings are going going to change this picture forever. This one here, great picture of his daughter on the bicycle, but then when you look into it a little bit, you realize 1898, 1899, what the bicycle meant to America, to young women in terms of this liberation, this thing that allowed them to come and go as they pleased, this thing that even changed fashion so that they didn't need, these big skirts didn't quite work anymore. They were able to kind of lobby for culottes and different kind of fashion that would loosen things up. And I just look at Marjorie, not standing next to her bicycle, she's on top of that bicycle. And she's ready to push off, I think, into her future. And I have a quote here where Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony both said that women are going to ride to suffrage on the bicycle. So not just a picture of a trestle, not just a picture of a girl on a bike, I think there's a lot more. And I think that's what makes Carroll as important as he is. So very briefly, when you go look around at the Hay House photos there and the children, John had identified Richard and Philip Kingsland Hay, who are James Hay's children. And I had always read about them, and do I forward it here? So Grace Church has got an incredible set of murals in it. I just urge that you go look at it just for the sheer art of them. They really are beautiful. Just a couple of images taken inside there. They're world-class art pieces. So this is a typical mural, 3 big, large parts to it. You see that there's an angel at the bottom of each one of these that happens to be holding a dedication plaque. Who paid for this or who it memorializes. But just look at the artwork here. It's absolutely beautiful. This is the descent of the cross. If you look, we have James R. Hay, the individual who owned that house, and his wife Sarah. I remember Sarah was the Kingsland that he married. And there's a close-up of that. But this is the one that really caught my attention. It is Joseph, who is the figure in the middle left field there, who is learning about the supposed death of Jacob, learning about the supposed death of his son Joseph, the multicolored coat who gets his brothers sell him into slavery. They tell the father that he has been dead. So you see this grief-stricken father here on the left who's hearing about the death of his son. And then when I looked a little further, I saw on the bottom it says, in memoriam, Philip Kingsland Hay, 1880-1900. And that's what got me interested in this. And when I followed the story, it turns out that young Philip was a student at Princeton University. His brother Richard, who's 5 years younger, so a very young teenager, goes down to visit him at Princeton. And that day they're in a canoe. The younger brother gets out because he's a little freaked out by the experience. The canoe gets caught in a small waterfall, and Philip gets caught in the undertow, and they find his body the next day. He's dead. It's front page of the New York Times, this story. There's a very touching description of 20 Princeton students who are carrying the coffin from that Hay House up Highfield Lane to Grace Church. So this is what got me interested in Philip Kingsland Hay and his story. John uncovered a story recently that, unbelievably, a year before this, Philip rescued someone from drowning while he was at camp. So he's got a lot of involvement in that. And it wasn't until these pictures got developed, I started to look at the Hay kids on the porch, eliminated the people that I knew, and I knew that the 2 brothers on the right, or I strongly suspect, why else would they be on the family porch, are Richard and his brother Philip. And so about 8 years after that picture is taken is when Philip does meet his death at Princeton. So I also suspect when you go there to look that Philip is also the individual here in the cap sitting next to his brother. And again, this is very close to 1900 when he is probably about to go to Princeton. So I think of all these, when you go back and you look at the dancers in the ring drum, they're all his friends, and they were obviously very much affected by the death of this young loved one who was very successful at Princeton at the time. And so back to the porch, the 2 brothers are the figures that you see all the way to the right. To tell you how close we are, these pictures seem like they're from ancient times. I wound up befriending an individual named Warren Kingsland Hay, who then turns out, after I got to know him for a while, it turns out when he started telling me stories, he is the younger brother Richard's son. And he recently passed over in New York City about a year and a half or so ago. So even somebody that I met very recently is very much connected to the people that we see in these photos. So it's not all that far away. This is a photo of Richard that was taken in Kingsland in the Hay House. And what's interesting is the estate contacted me after Warren passed, and the picture that you see up above there is a painting of Colonel Samuel Hay, somebody important in the Hay history. That was removed from that Hay House in 1930 when Richard sold the house. Warren has made sure that it's now come back to Nutley, and it's upstairs in our museum. So it's a wonderful thing to have gotten back. What's interesting, the last thing I'll mention is that Warren had told me that his father Richard, of course, who witnessed the death of his brother when they lived in New York City and would come into Jersey to visit relatives, would not take the tunnels. He would either get a ferry wherever he could, or he would take the GW Bridge when that was built, because he was still afraid of war. And then, interestingly enough, I uncovered when I was going through some Hay files upstairs a letter that Richard wrote to a relative of his, saying how he was sitting in his house one day, and remember, right down at the bottom where the mud hole is where the Nutley Waterworks was. It was an open pit of water at the time. He hears some screams, he comes running down, and he saves an individual from drowning. So between the waterworks, between Philip, the Hays have got a lot of connections with water. So I just wanted to bring that story to you because it really brought it home to me. And John wound up finding an image or finding some text about young Marjorie after he had seen her image for so many years. For me, it was the opposite. Reading all this stuff, never seeing an image of Philip, and then seeing his face when this show reared its head. So I just want to mention that. Again, thank you, John. And we'll take any questions if you want.
I also, just real quick, I want to make sure that it's understood that a big reason that this presentation was able to happen was through some generous contributions by Simon Sear, who has a wonderful garden party going on tonight. And I'm amazed that he's here with such a large event at his own place. So this is a guy who has supported Nutley history in many ways, and I just really want to thank you, sir, for helping make this
Is Gary Urbe still here? He left. Oh, he did, okay. Gary was here earlier. Gary is a painter on enclosure, and Gary has got the honor of being one of the inductees this November into the Nutley Hall of Fame. So I just want to mention that.
So if there are any questions, we could take them now. We are going to try to clear some of the seating also. Yes, Mike.
In your research, did you ever come across any references of when the photographer made prints himself? Like these prints in a stored in a museum someplace or some private collection?
I have seen several of these prints that are here. I have seen several in the museum collection in the past, plus other prints that at this point, I got to know NF style and everything. There are several prints in the museum collection which I am positive he took, but that are not part of this negative collection, which makes me believe that there is more out there.